It's enjoyed the world over, but what is the real cost of a cup of tea in an industry accused of exploitation and labour and human rights violations? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. After water, tea is the most widely consumed beverage in the world. But for many of those who work on the plantations where tea leaves are grown, there's a price to pay. Workers complain of poor conditions and low wages. One child protection group in India says that it's attracting traffickers who are luring away children who end up in cities as domestic workers or in prostitution. And the World Bank is investigating alleged labour violations at a plantation in India, as Fez Jamil reports from Assam State.
Arkit Naik and his wife have been living and working on this tea estate for more than a decade. About 5 years ago, Amalgamated Tea, owned by the Tata conglomerate, offered Naik and other employees a chance to buy company shares. Naik says he and others weren't interested, but weren't given a choice.
We were told, if you don't take shares, your work will be stopped. The laborers can't read or write. They were rounded up and forced to give their thumbprints. We were scared. That's why we gave in.
Even though he's now a part owner, Naik's family lives in a home without electricity and a roof that's been leaking for the past 8 years. They say any complaints about living conditions or share dividends are ignored.
Our house is in bad shape. I can't even take a $80 loan. How did they decide to take $130 from us? They forced us.
We tried speaking to other employees, but were asked to stop filming by several men on motorcycles who escorted us away. Amalgamated Tea declined an on-camera interview, but in person and through email stated that dividends have been paid yearly, though they were called something else in bank statements. They also say that any issue with worker conditions were isolated incidents. Al Jazeera later met several other Amalgamated Tea employees who told us, despite now being part owners of the company, they still live in poor conditions. They also had no idea they'd received dividends and that different company officials gave them different answers. Tea plantations rely on a large number of workers to stay productive and profitable. Giving the workers company shares is being touted as a way to share the profits and improve their lives. But critics charge it's actually a way to shield the company. This union leader says many workers believe now that they're shareholders, they've lost the right to complain about working conditions. And giving shares simply distracts from the conditions they endure.
After giving $130, the Tata tea worker still has many problems. They don't have proper homes, water to drink, or hospital facility. What they need to get, they're not getting.
When contacted, Amalgamated Tea stated that the share scheme is entirely voluntary, and that they strongly refute that there was coercion or any sort of pressure whatsoever on employees to apply to this scheme, and that no employee has lost his or her job either for not subscribing to the share scheme or for voicing grievances. But workers we spoke to say they're too worried to complain and feel powerless to improve their lives or their future. Fez Jamil, Al Jazeera, Dibrugarh, Assam, India.
So plenty to discuss with our guests. In New Delhi, we have Sukti Dital, a human rights lawyer and executive director of NASDIC, which is working closely with tea workers in Assam. And in New York is Sarah Sardoon, researcher and co-author of the report, The More Things Change, the World Bank, Tata and Enduring Abuses of India's Tea Plantations. We're going to hear first, though, from Roshan Rajaradai, chairman of the Planters Association in Sri Lanka and CEO of 2 plantation companies. He joins me on the line now from Colombo. Thank you very much for joining us on the line. We've just been seeing what the situation is in India and the human rights abuses committed against tea workers. What is the situation in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, our tea industry is basically segmented into 2 factors. About two-thirds of the tea industry is managed by the tea smallholders, and about one-third, what we call formal sector, is by the plantation companies. In the plantation companies, we look after a population about 1 million people, out of which about 200,000 people are employees, but we also look after the dependents, that is the retirees.
Okay, explain to me how you look after them.
Well, in the plantation sector, we have by statute guaranteed minimum number of days for a year, that is 300 days. And we have a minimum wage. Our wage is about 620 Sri Lankan rupees. It's close to about $5 per day. And then we have to look after their health, welfare. We give them free housing, water, sanitation, all the health issues, we look after them. Well, we have a saying that we look after them from womb to the tomb, in the sense from prenatal to till the time they die, they are under our care, under the care of these organized plantations.
It certainly sounds that you are the exception to the rule in Sri Lanka, because families that work on these plantations are amongst the poorest. They suffer severe malnutrition problems. So clearly the minimum wage in other parts of the country is not enough.
In Sri Lanka, the wages are set by collective agreements with the major trade unions. Once in 2 years, we sit down together and we agree on the wage increases. So minimum wage of 620 rupees in Sri Lanka is fairly a substantial wage, because we provide them the other facilities. Like, as I mentioned you, housing is free for them, health and sanitation is free at no cost to the workers.
But again, I'm suggesting that you are the exception in Sri Lanka, because what you're describing is not what we have found in parts of the country. What do you think is being done to try and improve their lot, considering it's such an important industry for the country?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I want to reiterate, there are two important segments. One is tea smallholders. They are usually self-employed, and their family labor is employed in harvesting. So obviously they would not have minimum wage rate, because they are entrepreneurs. But in the organized sector, what we call the companies, we have to abide by the minimum wage wages and all the other conditions that we agree with the major trade unions.
Okay, Roshan Rajadurai, thank you very much for talking to us and sharing your experience with us. Sarah, it was very interesting reading your report, and equally disturbing. Tell us more about your findings, what really stood out for you and how you came about this information.
So what the report does is it documents a case of a major multinational company. Tata is the second largest tea company in the world. How they took advantage of their position to bring in the World Bank and implement a project that they claimed was a development project, but in fact was an effort to divest themselves of responsibilities of their 31,000 workers. So we visited 15 plantations, most on multiple occasions, and what we found was that consistently across the board there were egregious violations. The conditions were absolutely horrific. There were violations of Indian law, there were violations of the World Bank standards, from workers spraying pesticides without protective gear, to discrimination against women. Their dependents were not getting the kinds of benefits that they are guaranteed under Indian law, to monopoly unions in Assam. All sorts of violations plagued these plantations.
And who is behind these violations? Why are they allowed to happen?
Well, there are several reasons. I mean, the World Bank is a development bank, and they have requirements, social standards that every project must comply with. And what we found in this project, that they just simply failed to do their homework. They relied on the fact that Tata is considered a leader in corporate social responsibility, that the plantations were certified by Social Accountability 8000, that it's a member of the Ethical Tea Partnership, and used this relied on this and didn't do due diligence to ensure that the plantations actually were in compliance with their standards. And in essence, Tata used these certifications as a fig leaf to sell a development project to the World Bank that was supposed to empower workers by selling shares of the company to their workers, but actually had the effect of making their workers left holding the bag, essentially, while Tata pulled back from operations of the company, and the workers are left in absolutely terrible conditions.
And frightened. Sukti, do these findings ring true from what you experience on a day-to-day basis with the tea workers?
Yeah, I just want to start by thanking the network for taking this important issue forward. I mean, it's been over 150 years of slave-like conditions on the gardens and serious degrees of exploitation, and finally the public is awakening to the darkness that's there in the gardens. And I think
I'm going to quickly jump in at that point. Why do you think it's taken so long? I mean, people must know. People must have known that this was going on. So why now?
You know, I think we're dealing with a colonial hangover here. We're talking about structures that are deep, patriarchal, hierarchical structures that are very deep. And the transition of power from the British colonial times to now the tea plantation owners, you're looking at 3 to 4 generations of oppression. And in many ways forced labor and bonded slavery. So to be able to gain agency and to be able to gain awareness about what your rights are and what those entitlements may be, and then to be able to mobilize and collectivize and start to demand is a very, very challenging thing for workers and their families to do. And, you know, I'm here in solidarity with the workers and the groups on the ground who are really the first in the region to be able to take this issue to not only a local platform, but a national and international one.
And it's more than just making sure that their working conditions are improved, isn't it? I mean, the minimum wage in some countries is less than $2 a day, and I don't know how anyone can live off that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the point that the workers and the NGOs that are fighting on behalf of the workers really want to stress is that the complaint that was filed with the World Bank is only part of a larger strategy to really demand structural change. We're not talking about piecemeal things here, fixing a latrine, making sure that a house is fixed. We're talking about structural changes like living wages. Workers today are earning 94 rupees a day, which is about $1.50. And if you then take deductions for electricity, you take deductions for retirement funds, you take deductions for rations, you're looking at barely $1 a day. So what we're looking for, what we're demanding, are structural changes like living wages, new forms of governance and democracy, and building up living conditions that are consistent with international and national law.
Let's stay with the money theme. I mean, tea is a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Sri Lanka is the market leader with exports worth some $1.4 billion a year. China is second, selling just short of $1 billion worth of tea abroad. India, once the world number 1, exports $867 million worth of tea, being pushed hard now by Kenya, the world's 4th biggest exporter. So who's drinking it all? Well, the world's biggest importer of tea is Russia, spending in excess of $500 million, almost as thirsty as the United Arab Emirates. The United Kingdom imports tea worth more than $333 billion. And the US has developed a taste for tea worth $318 million. Sarah, so clearly a massive industry with massive demand. The money is there, if the will were to be there, to treat the workers better, isn't it?
Well, that's the interesting thing that we found with the tea industry in India. It's doing exactly what the apparel industry did a decade ago. The major companies like Tata are moving the profits from production to branding and marketing. And so the price that Russians or Americans or others are paying for tea, the large part of that goes, rather than to the people producing the tea, to those who are marketing and branding the tea. And the project that we've focused on, the company, the reason that Tata wanted to sell part of the company to its workers is in order to move its focus to branding and marketing while still having some level of control over production. But this is exactly the problem. The downward pressure on the producers' prices leaves the workers even more impoverished than they were before, all under the guise of a development project.
So do you think pressure needs to be put onto these companies to justify their profits when their workers continue to live in those dire conditions?
Absolutely. I think that that Tata, especially because it puts so much stock in its reputation as a corporate social responsibility leader, needs to make sure that the 31,000 people in Assam and West Bengal who are producing their tea are paid wages. And I will add about what Sukti mentioned, the issue of a living wage. Even fair trade tea is the amount paid is the same exact amount. It's a situation where it's not a minimum wage, but the tripartite agreement that sets the wages, it makes it the only wage that's paid across all of the plantations. So workers can't even vote with their feet and go elsewhere because all of the plantations pay the same abysmal wages.
And Sukti, there's another horrible spin-off to this kind of abuse, the fact that child traffickers in particular are preying on some of the children, some of the women who work on these tea plantations. They get enticed away and then get sold as slaves or prostitutes. How big a problem is that?
It's a very serious problem. It's a very, very serious problem in the gardens, and we've come across incidents of trafficking across the state. And I think it really emphasizes the point that when the workers are living in a state of abject poverty, that necessarily leads to a range of human rights violations, whether they're trafficking, whether it's illiteracy, whether it's malnutrition and starvation deaths. I mean, the list is endless in terms of the type of desperation and what causes communities to have to sell their children as a way of being able to survive. This has to stop now, and I just want to underscore the point that was raised earlier, which is that what can consumers do? What can the public do? We can demand that the companies are accountable to the law. Companies like Tata have taken $8 million of public funding under the guise of alleviation of poverty and development. If this company is resulting in this kind of condition, you can just imagine what's happening across the state. Consumers have to demand a more accountable standard from the companies with which they're purchasing tea.
And Sarah, what about the supermarkets? Because surely the pressure that they put on suppliers to provide more for less impacts again on the workers, keeping those wages down.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody in the supply chain, from consumer, supermarkets, producers, all have to demand accountability. But one of the problems that our report highlights is that the model which we are using today for social responsibility, things like Social Accountability 8000, which is a certification program, or Ethical Tea Partnership, that these are not sufficient efforts to ensure accountability because they're not grounded in law, because the penalties for violating the terms are not severe enough for a variety of reasons, because auditors are easily tricked because they announce their visits in advance, which was a major issue that we uncovered in our research, that the model in which consumers demand accountability today is simply not reliable enough.
I'm happy to say there's a bit of a light in the story, because Sri Lanka, as we saw, is the world's biggest exporter of tea. But like India, plantation workers are considered among the poorest paid. Now, a new project is aimed at improving the lives of some families. Manel Fernandez reports.
This is hard work. Vijay Lakshmi and hundreds of thousands of plantation workers like her spend 6 to 8 hours a day harvesting tea leaves. They are the descendants of people from India brought to Sri Lanka by the British almost 200 years ago to work on plantations. Today they earn around $4 to $5 for picking a day's quota, which can range between 10 and 18 kilos.
It's only if we meet the daily targets that we get paid the basic wage.
And they meet those targets in all kinds of weather. Earnings fluctuate depending on the crop. And aid agencies point out that workers' living conditions are difficult.
You can see the poverty level, and the children are malnourished, and they are living in a very small space for the last couple of decades.
Plantation housing has consisted of long buildings like this, divided into rooms for each family. Parents, children and extended families, sometimes 10 to 12 people, live in these line rooms. Alcoholism and malnutrition are common. Plantation companies say they take care of workers from womb to tomb. They provide healthcare, childcare and other services. But there is still a lack of basic facilities.
When they parade in the morning for work, sometimes they're late. So when you ask the basic question as to why they're late, they say we don't have toilet facilities, we don't have water, so we have to finish that.
Sri Lankan tea brings in millions of dollars every year, but plantation workers, who are the backbone of the industry, see little of it. While there have been improvements in recent years, many still live in houses like this. But now, this new project is aiming to improve their lives. World Vision has worked with a plantation company to introduce a pilot scheme for workers. 23 families have been given specially designed houses with running water and dedicated toilets. The project also allows people to earn some extra money by raising chickens and growing vegetables.
We have always lived with my in-laws. We have 3 children of our own and we share a common living space. So it's for everyone's benefit that we got this house of our own.
The people at World Vision say the success of this project means 75 more houses will be built. For these workers who play such a vital role in the tea industry, they're happy to finally have a decent place to live. Minna Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Talavakkale, Sri Lanka.
Sukti, what do you make of that project? Is it something that could be rolled out quite easily in India, for example?
It sounds like a wonderful project from the brief amount that I heard, but I think that we're really talking about structural changes. This means discussions on who is governing the unions, who is governing and representing the workers. This means serious discussions about what is an adequate wage. What we're looking for is not a piecemeal 75 houses being fixed. While that's important, and I'm sure that the families are benefiting from that, these are massive, massive structural changes that are necessary. And I just want to make one point again in terms of the wage component. We're seeing one of the workers we're working with, he's a 3rd generation tea garden worker. He recognizes that the infrastructure in the gardens is poor. 200 students, 1 teacher. He wants to send his child outside to a private school. He can't afford the basic transportation on a daily basis to be able to send his child outside. So what happens then? Poor education, most likely child labor, and then another generation of workers within the gardens. So these are really serious discussions that we need to have with the workers, with the management, with the government, and with the public.
Sarah, hearing all that and from your own experience, you can never look at a cup of tea the same way again, and possibly nor should you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely affected my tea drinking. But I'd like to also make a point about the report that you just ran. I think it's worth questioning whether the response to poverty wages should be the investment of public money in improving the situation. I mean, of course, it's really important to improve the lives of these workers in any way possible, but we also have to question the basic business model that pays such dismal wages that we need these programs to step in to make sure that these workers are not suffering from malnutrition. I mean, that's the underlying problem, as Sukti suggests. We need structural changes to ensure that the tea that we are drinking, that we are paying a fair price for, that the price that we're paying is divided up in such a way that the workers who are producing it get enough so that they can feed themselves and their families.
Sarah Sudan concluding our program there. Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to Sukti Dital and our other guest, Roshan Rajdure. Just remember, if you want to watch the show again or tell anyone else about it, you can find the show and many more on our website. Just follow the links for shows and inside story. I'm Jane Dutton. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye for now.